Well, hey there. Happy Math Crush Monday. I hope that you're doing well. We are talking about retaining information, and so we're going to make this pretty quick. I just have a few ideas for you of things that have come up recently. As I talk to teachers more and more, this is a concern, is that our students, we're spending so much time and energy trying to teach students and get them to understand concepts that we need it to actually be retained over time, right? So we don't want our fifth graders, who we've been spending several months teaching fractions, come in February, say, what's a fraction? We want them to actually retain them. So when we talk about retaining, I'm going to give you 3 different things that I think you can try to help retain information with your students. The first one is the remembering side of our homework. So specifically in math expressions, there are 2 sides of the homework. Now, if you're in kindergarten, the homework is only one-sided for a little bit, and then as you get through Unit 1, it becomes 2-sided. So it is there. So there's a separate consumable called homework and remembering. I would much rather your students get the remembering side, and that's what they do for homework, than the homework side. So I generally find that the homework side is too difficult. It's still at the instructional level for students. It is not at the independent level, and homework should be independent. So even though the homework side is covering the things we talked about in class, the reality is your kids only had one day, and for the most part, with that content. It just wasn't long enough for them to really have enough information that they can apply it and have effective, that distributive practice that we all want our students to have. Now, it's not to say that you couldn't say, oh, let's do like 1 or 2 problems on the homework side and just see how they do. But I think you'll find a lot less frustration from parents, from kids, everything, if you save the homework side and use that as a bell ringer the next day in class. Like, kids come in, they start working on the homework side. They use it as a formative assessment, an exit ticket, quick quiz, something they do later, like as a rotation or practice. But the reality is there's so much practice in the workbook that I don't know that you really need all that more practice that day until they have really had a time to develop the skill. Okay, so the homework side, not as important to me. The remembering side, super important. In fact, that's where most of Dr. Fuson's research came, was understanding the importance of that spiral review. So expressions is not a spiral program. It's not like everyday math or some of the others where you kind of touch on geometry and then you don't talk about it for a while and then you touch on it again, unless of course you teach kindergarten. Kindergarten is more of a spiral throughout your year. But everyone else, we really do want to teach units to mastery. And so for what we want then is we want the remembering side to help retain information. So I want you to use the remembering every single day for homework. And if you don't assign homework, maybe you have a district policy, a school policy, a personal philosophy about homework, then use the remembering side as the bell ringer, as independent work, as an asynchronous activity. However, right? But it is important that the remembering side is done nearly every single day. It is one of the more important components of math expressions. So the remembering side spirals through what students have already learned, and we just need consistent review of things. Now, it does get complicated, and if we've rearranged anything this year, then that does impact remembering, and you'll just have to mark off the things that don't apply for right now. But remembering is the first important one, okay? So do the remembering. Kids, none of us can hold on to things we did 3 months ago. Think about what you did in your professional development staff meeting 3 months ago. Now, if someone brings it up and you start to have a conversation again, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember doing that. It's the same with your kids. They haven't forgotten it. They just need to bring it back up again and refresh their memory. That's what the remembering side does. I also want you to think about anchoring. Okay, so one of the more important strategies that I give them is this idea of anchoring, and that we really need to anchor the learning at the end of each day. So I know we've all been taught we should have closure, we should have exit tickets, all of that is great, but I really would love for you to make a visual anchor. So boys and girls, let's summarize what we did today. So today we talked about how the numerator's on the top and the denominator's on the bottom. Boys and girls, we talked about how the numerator tells us the parts we're counting and the denominator tells us all of the parts in the whole. And I'm going to make a visual on a chart, on a Jamboard, digital, whatever, that I anchor that, and I specifically use color coding to help. So if I call it the numerator in red, I'm going to color code the numerator in red on the actual numbers, like the 1 if the 1 is a numerator, right? So I'm going to make it color coded. I'm going to really summarize. So we just said that if it has 3 parts, it's called thirds. Whatever your content is, fractions are just on my brain, right now, you're going to anchor that learning. So we decided in first grade today that there's 3 different ways we could solve for the unknown. We can count up, we can do a circle drawing, and I'm going to anchor those ideas on an anchor chart. I'm going to build it with students. Now, I personally always kind of plan out my anchor charts ahead of time for the unit. You know that if you're in the Math Genius Squad, oftentimes I'll show you my anchor charts of what I'm thinking I'm going to probably come up with as we go through the unit, but I don't have it pre-prepared in a anchor chart format. I build it with students because here's what happens. Tomorrow, we're going to start with it. We're like, okay, what did we do yesterday? Do you remember? So yesterday, everyone remind me, what's the numerator? What's the denominator? I also do a lot of coaching in classrooms, and I can't tell you the number of times I watch students search the room for the answer. It's on the tip of their tongue. Like, I remember us talking about that. What was it she said again? And the vocabulary is there, and with the visual support and the color coding, and they have an anchor to go to. But when we anchor it to a chart, we continue to revisit that chart. So I have the same anchor chart for the entire unit, and it might even turn into 2, right? But every day we go back. So what do we remember here? Okay, so do you remember? And then we're connecting. Okay, so the other way that we retain information is when we can connect it to something we've already done. So I always start with, so remember when we did it like this? What if we added on and we also were able to do it like this? At the end of that lesson, I'm going to anchor it. And that's how we're going to help students retain that information. But I need to synthesize it for them. I need to summarize it, and we need to plant it somewhere in the room. Okay, so I'm not as obsessed with kids writing it down in their own notebooks. I think it takes a lot of time and it's a lot of working memory, but an anchor chart at least I think will be helpful. I also want to talk, so tell me about what you think about that. Something you just heard that might be helpful. So we talked about the remembering side. Okay, we talked about anchoring the learning. Okay, so at the end of every day, we always anchor. We say, here's what we did today. Here's the visual to support it. And then we're going to keep revisiting it. We're also going to use quick practice and daily routines. So I'm going to make a note here. I just thought of something that I want to say. Quick practice and daily routines. I know like I'm a broken record about this, and I'm not going to stop. If you're not doing them, you're not helping. Okay, it's not helping the matter. I know you don't have enough time. I know you're strapped for time, resources. We have so much we have to fit in. Friends, you got to do the daily routines and quick practices every day. There's new ones. They've been rewritten for 2018. I've given you the slide decks. I've given you the videos. Everyone who gives me feedback on quick practice and daily routines, go look at the feed. People are say things like, I never used to do it. I do it now. I can't believe how fluent my kids are with money. They can't remember, X, Y, and Z, but they do now because we've done it every day in quick practice. Long division is killing me. Don't worry, you're going to tackle it in quick practice. Okay, so it's not the same as bell ringer. It's not like come in and do the work in your notebook and then we're going to go over the problems. That's not the point. The point is mental math oral rehearsal. Okay, so we're not ever just watching kids do math up there on the board. That's not what quick practice and daily routines are about. That's like watching paint dry, and it's not fun. Okay, this is about picking up the pace and rehearsing. So what does a centimeter look like, right? The centimeter is the width of my finger. Boys and girls, what's an inch? An inch is like my nose, a rose, or even like my toes. That's quick practice. It's rehearsing things. So remember, it has two purposes. It can either be to prepare your students for something that's coming, or it's going to rehearse things that you already taught, but there just was not enough rehearsal time. There wasn't enough time to practice that skill as much as your kids needed it. It's going to show up in quick practice. Okay, it's the same thing with daily routines. So if we want our students to retain information, we need to have those components in place. Give them the best shot. I think, what I recently read is something like a student with special needs on an IEP specifically needs something like 700 repetitions of something. Really? Right? So how else are you going to give them 700 repetitions? So, and that's a student with special needs. Think about our regular ed students. So it's not going to be 700, but I guarantee you it's a pretty high number, right? With things that need procedural fluency, they need a lot of rehearsal. So we've talked about remembering. I want you to use the remembering side of the homework all the time. Anchoring. At the end of a lesson, take time to just anchor the learning to an anchor chart. Color code it, vocabulary, visuals. Okay, not the whole, just the summary. Okay, summary, friends, summary. So you can make connections, because connections are another way to retain. Quick practice and daily routines. That's going to help students retain information. Lastly, I will oftentimes put weave in information during my lesson, like story problems go on forever in second grade. One of the grades, I will take those story problems, and instead of like freaking out about it, I'll start putting one of those problems up a day for students. It's one of the activities they do when they come in, because I know I don't have a whole day to devote to it, but my students need more rehearsal. So instead of like dragging it out for 4 more days, which is going to kill all of us, I just plant one problem like it and I space out that rehearsed practice. Okay, so I think that that generally will help some of that as well. So I want to know what else you do, right? So what else do you do in your class to help students retain what you're teaching them? What did I say that is helping? I'd love to hear that in the comments. What do you do that I didn't say that would be helpful for other people? Let me know right now. So if, I make everything for my Math Genius squad, but then all the quick practice and daily routine slides, we've made all of those complimentary for anyone to use. All right, my friends. Well, that's our goal for tonight, talking about how do we get students to retain. There's more things that I can go into here, but just with time, we're not going to dive too deeply. One of them that comes to mind is that when we attach visual models to what we're teaching, in general, kids will know it and retain it longer. Anytime we attach reasoning and strategy work to a concept, kids will retain it for longer. Anytime we do just drill practice, that usually is stored in our short-term memory. So when we first introduce something to students, it's really important that they have an opportunity to build it, to draw it, to represent it, and to connect it to previous learning. That will result in long-term learning. So I gave you some other practical things of things to implement in your class, but for sure, when you introduce something, make sure you give students the opportunity to do all of those things so that it's not stored in short-term memory. An example would be like multiplication facts. When you just start drilling, stored in short-term memory. They're going to memorize them for this year. Next year's teacher's going to say, we don't have our facts. Right, because it was never really attached to strategy work, to reasoning, to visuals. That's why. All right, friends. Let me know how you feel about this. I'm so glad that you're here. If there's something you would like to see in our Math Crush Mondays, a topic you'd like me to cover, just let me know in the comments below. If you're watching this video delayed, let me know. Still chime in. It's always great to hear from you. Thanks, everyone. Take care.